Okay. Sorry for the delay. We'll call this meeting to order of the Transportation Benefit District for the City of Bellingham for November 10th, 2014. We have 3 items on our agenda this afternoon: WTA contract, TBD work plan, and TBD proposed budget. And that's all I've got in front of me, so I'm assuming I'm just going to turn it over to staff.
Thank you. Brian Henshaw, City of Bellingham Finance Department. I'll do the first one, which is the renewal, the 4th renewal of the contract between the Transportation Benefit District Number 1 and Whatcom Transportation Authority. This is the 4th renewal that will take us through the first 5 years of the agreement between, to provide bus service, the fixed route and paratransit service on Attachment A. There's a small increase overall in the hourly rates, but only a small increase from $1,463,000 from $1,438,000 in 2014. So most of the routes and the hours are all remaining fixed with a small increase in the hourly rates. WTA is here also if you have any questions for them. Otherwise, we'll just proceed with the renewal of that contract.
Gene?
Pretty standard of what we've seen in the past. Nothing, like you said, other than a minor
Nothing
monetary
changed
change.
other than it is the final year
This
of
is-
the first 5 years of the TBD. So we need to, next year, work with WTA on renewing that for the second 5 years.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? Michael?
I'd like to ask about,
Microphone?
yes, thank you. I'd like to ask about this memo here from General Manager Stark. Is this related to the same conversation or not?
That's next.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll move approval of the contract.
Second. A motion and a second. Any further discussion? Michael?
Do you know what the status of the WTA's discussion is on replacing the TBD funds with potentially their own funds? You know, it's coming sooner than we think, and I think planning should be started now, and I'm just wondering if WTA has approached that yet. I didn't hear anything in their budget deliberations, but maybe there is some other discussions going on.
I think that the plan is that that's what needs to happen early next year for your input on what you would like to do with the renewal of the contract and also WTA's expectations. But right now, this contract would take us through the end of 2015. And during that time period, we're going to have to reach a consensus and agreement between the two entities on if that's going to continue or not. So we'll work on that starting as soon as we can this year and at the end of this year and the beginning of next year.
Right. I mean, my goal would not be to withdraw funding for Sunday service and not have a replacement. You know, the goal would be that WTA could conceivably adopt some kind of a smaller levy, and then we could then cut our levy. And so for Bellingham users, it could be, you know, a wash. It would really be a transfer of funding from one jurisdiction to another back to, I think, the more logical jurisdiction. So I guess that's what I would hope a discussion would start with.
Okay. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the WTA contract, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes 6-0 with Terry Borneman absent.
So there is a second transit-related item that was not identified separately on your agenda, and it's what Councilmember Lillquist mentioned, a letter from WTA requesting TBD funding to help fund a capital project on Bellows Fair Parkway. It's relocating an existing stop to a more appropriate location due to safety reasons. There's been some changes to circulation within Bellows Fair that have to do with the improvements that were made on Meridian a couple of years ago that restricted left turns off of Meridian at Telegraph, putting more traffic up to the signal north of Telegraph and onto Bellows Fair Parkway, which made one of the movements that WTA has been doing more challenging because there's more traffic, fewer gaps, and it has become a safety concern. They've requested Transportation Benefit District funding to help fund that project. We've taken that to the Transportation Commission. The idea would be that the money would come from the transit 1/3 of the TBD funding, so we would not be taking this money from the non-motorized portion of the TBD funding, which has been allocated towards pedestrian master plan and bicycle master plan projects, but rather the balance of anything remaining in the transit 1/3. Based on the contract that you just approved, There's about $100,000 of actual 2015 revenue that could be put towards this project. But we also think there's going to be some money remaining from 2 previous capital projects that the board has approved with transit funds. One was the Greenways Bridge over Whatcom Creek that had transit money in it, and the other being the non-motorized rail crossing at the north end of Boulevard Park. So between the 2 of those projects, budget remaining and the $100,000, we think we may have in the area of $200,000 or $250,000 of the transit 1/3 that could go towards this project. It's quite a bit more expensive than that, so that it's a total estimate of around $450,000 for the project. But staff recommends that the remaining transit 1/3 money of about $250,000 be put towards this project. We believe that using the TBD money for capital type system improvements makes sense. We've done that in the past. We a couple years ago improved Alabama and Woburn to make it more friendly for the buses, to allow them to make a movement onto Woburn. So we do recommend approval of this, and if there's any questions, WTA staff is here as well as city staff to answer questions.
Great, Jean, and then Jack.
Not being a frequent mall goer, exactly where would it be located at?
So and Rick, do you want to come up maybe
Yeah.
and speak quickly to this? Rick Nicholson can come up and speak to that, but we're gonna, and I might be able to put a graphic up
Not a
as
mall
well.
rat, Jean?
No, I'm not a mall rat.
So shocked to hear that.
I actually, is this on?
Yep.
Okay. I actually have it on a disk here, if you would like to load it and take a look at it. I'll let you do that, though.
Thanks, Marie.
That may take-
Jack, do you want to go while he's loading?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Ted, the question is, or the recommendation is to fund the entire amount out of the TBD?
The recommendation would be to take whatever funds are available out of the 1/3 transit portion of the TBD and apply it to this project. It wouldn't fully fund it.
So between 200 and 250, depending on the results of the rest, there are 2 projects?
Yeah, and I've spoken with Pete about this, then it would be incumbent on WTA to find the funding somewhere else, but he understands that we may not have all the money, and certainly WTA appreciates whatever TBD funding could be allocated towards this project.
Okay, I don't know. I hope this is clear for you. So this is a map of the northeast corner of Bellis Fair Mall, and with the northeast corner of the Macy's store you see there toward the bottom of the slide. And everything in red, the red lines there you see are the existing WTA bus routing through the Macy's store. And we come in and actually stop right in. Pardon me? Oh, okay. Yeah. So we come in off of the Parkway, back off the screen, come down, follow this red line. We currently stop at the Macy's store right there at their north entrance. And then we come back out and head up to the Parkway. And then depending upon what direction the routes are going, they either take a left going out to our Cordata station or a right heading downtown. And this is the problem area for us. And it has become much worse since the DOT, as Ted mentioned, did their work on Meridian safety issues that they did 2 summers ago now. And it's put a lot more traffic on this ramp coming up from Meridian. And because buses accelerate so slowly and because of the limited sight distance there, we have had a couple fender benders and just a lot of nervous drivers who are not comfortable making this turn, and neither are staff. So this is driven primarily as a safety issue for us. And what we would like to do is move the stop out to the Parkway itself. And eastbound, it would be located in this area here. This is just a rough idea. And this would be a bus pullout that would handle 2 of our buses at one time. And then on the north side would be a new bus stop that would be in the traffic lane. There's 2 lanes of traffic westbound, only 1 eastbound. So there would still be 1 lane open westbound up on the north side of the street there. And then there's an existing sidewalk, ADA accessible path of travel from that area that goes back down to the Macy's door, and we would continue to use that and would connect with it. This is a crosswalk here that is not very heavily used right now, but there's a new hotel going in right up here, and we are proposing to move the crosswalk back about where you see the cursor now. and then do other items as we have spelled out here. Put in a pedestrian crossing signal, put in overhead lighting at the new bus stops, just make it much more pedestrian and just, friendly for people waiting for the bus. Put in turtles on the road to let uphill traffic, which oftentimes is coming much faster than the 20 or 25 miles an hour that they're supposed to. And just put in warnings, basically, for folks coming uphill. And then another piece of it is this little island, which is near the bottom of the ramp, would have to get cut back, narrowed, in order for our buses, as they're coming down this ramp, to be able to safely access and get in the left lane, because now we're going to have a bus that's actually taking a left onto Meridian there. So that's another piece of the project. So all of that combined is in the approximately $450,000 that Ted mentioned.
Roxanne?
Well, as one of your WTA board members, I just wanted to say that when you look at this, you may think you have a genius idea on how to solve it, but so many of the WTA professionals and also the board have gone over and over this through our board consideration. And so this is just such a much needed improvement for the operators and for the community members. So I hope this is something council will really consider.
Michael?
I have no questions about the project. It's probably a fine project. My question is, why should the city of Bellingham, or rather the TBD, be paying for this? This seems like a quintessentially WTA program, and just because TBD has money, I don't think is a great reason. And I say that in part because the 1/3 formula is not mathematically precise. The language in there is a rough parity between the three areas, not a formula. If we have another $100,000, it may be better deployed for street resurfacing or for another non-motorized project. I just don't know why we should be building this kind of capital when it's clearly a WTA need.
Well, I think that's exactly the policy question that's before the board. Staff has tried to adhere to the 1/3. That's been the direction in the past. We've varied from it from time to time with board approval. But we have tried to stick to the 1/3, and in the past, when there's been some balance remaining in 1/3 of transit, we've put it towards capital projects. And in working with WTA, this is the next project that they would recommend. So that's why it's being brought forward, but you're entirely right. It's a policy discussion for the board, and that's why we brought it before you.
If I may just add to that, another one of the secondary benefits, it's not the reason we're doing this, but it is a secondary benefit, is that the main route that serves the Macy's stop here is the Route 331, which also serves Woburn and Alabama. And with the new crosswalks going in on Alabama and the slower speed limit on Alabama, this is one thing we can do of many things, hopefully, that we'll do to try to keep that route on time. So there's also an on-time performance benefit to WTA for doing this.
Jack?
Yeah, Michael, I guess I agree with you that it is a policy discussion that we should be dealing with this. I strongly would be advocating that one-time capital expenses such as this is a very appropriate use of TBD money versus like an ongoing cost like the Sunday service. I think we get a better bang for our buck doing that to assist the WTA agency of providing better service for people within Bellingham. That said, I also, as a WTA board member, we have gone over this quite a bit over the last few months, and the one thing that I have brought up a few times has been whether or not General Growth, as the owner of the mall, what their contribution is into this type of project, since it's very clear that the customers that are using the bus service are customers of the mall, and they're just as equal as anybody that's pulling a car into their gigantic parking lot. And the amount of money that they spend to maintain, construct and maintain their parking lot is so much more than the amount that this would cost in order to ensure that there's good customer service for their customers that are coming into the mall using the bus. So my question to you, Rick, is what's the latest on their contribution into this type of project?
Right. Pete and I met with them after the board meeting where that last came up. So financial contribution, dollars, we're not going to see it. But what they make a very strong point, they make two very strong points. One is that the new bus pull out there that you see in green is going to take up about roughly 40 or so existing parking spaces.
40,
and they put a
40.
monetary value on parking.
40?
About 40, yeah.
40.
It's not just the bus pull-out itself, but it's also the ability of the cars in the parking lot now to be able to get turned around at the north end of those of that angled parking. And so there's going to kind of have to be almost a parallel road just south of that pull-out, and that takes up some parking as well. So they put a monetary value on lost parking spaces that for them is real. The other point they brought up to us is that they have spent considerable amount of money repairing the road due to the heavy vehicles, much of which, in their mind, are WTA buses, so that they are putting out monies to maintain, WTA's presence on the property. And they are in the process of drafting a letter that would put, in their words, what that monetary value that they have for the parking spaces. But in terms of actual dollars, that doesn't seem to be happening.
And they're blaming the buses for the damage to the road versus their own delivery semi-trucks?
In part, well, they're blaming all heavy vehicles, of which WTA is one of those.
Roxanne.
Well, I feel like we got our answer from their organization when we asked if there could be some kind of shelter that could be built over the sidewalk, and the response was that that would block the signage to the stores. So I don't think we're going to get $1 out of that organization for these improvements.
Michael.
Parking and the parking lot is very expensive for general, whatever they're called. The figure I heard from someone in that organization, they spend $500,000 a year just on repairing and replacing the parking lot. Not all at once, obviously. It's a very expensive thing for them to maintain. But it does kind of raise the question, who would own these improvements? Is this on their private property? I mean, what happens to its upkeep? Who's responsible for its upkeep once it's put in place? Is it WTA's, or does the owners of the mall take over responsibility for the facility?
Typically, we don't have a firm agreement on that, but the way it's worked in the past, such as at the Lincoln Creek bus pull-through that we have there, WTA maintains the WTA the portion that we operate on generally. So I would imagine that would play in this case as well. So the bus pull-outs themselves, the maintenance of the shelters, that type of thing, yeah.
Anything else, Michael?
Yeah, I guess I want to go back to the policy question. I actually have in the past supported one-time capital monies for WTA transit-related projects inside city limits with the money. So this isn't totally against my personal grain, but the question again to me is not whether this is a good project. The question is whether or not spending it on this use as opposed to the other competing TBD uses. That is the road resurfacing project program, as well as the non-motorized. We're going to be talking about the non-motorized as a long list, and there are some tier 1 or short-term projects on the bike and ped master plan that aren't being funded in the near term. They're not part of the next 2-year work plan, and 1 or 2 of those could be bumped up. So that's one of the competing uses. Back in June, the TBD board, sort of the city council, asked staff for a discussion of the entire road resurfacing project. It had to do with questions that came up at the time of the tip about how adequately we are funding, or rather how severely we are underfunding our needs for resurfacing. We know we're underfunding our need for resurfacing. We're not keeping up with the pace. It's way better than it used to be, but it's still not up to snuff. So that is the trade-off. It's not whether this is a good project, but there are tier 1 and high priority bike and ped projects that could be brought forward, and there is another section of road, of arterial, that could be repaved. I mean, I don't have a good answer, but I think I'd kind of want to hear about those other two program areas before I can even decide on a trade-off like this.
Okay. Jack, and then I'm going to make a motion.
No, I'm going to make a motion.
It worked.
So I move that we allocate up to $250,000 conditioned on Ted's explanation about 2015 balances in the transit component of the TBD fund for 2015.
Second.
Okay, and we have a motion and a second. I'd like to make a friendly amendment to your motion.
Okay.
Would you consider $225,000?
And up to 200?
Up to 225, splitting the cost.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. It's a gesture and a policy statement that we're splitting. We're
Long
not
as-
going over half.
As a friendly amendment, as long as it's okay with everybody else.
Yeah, is it okay with everybody else?
We have to vote on the amendment first anyway, so that's all.
If there's no objection, it is considered voted on.
Yeah.
Okay, so is there any objection to a friendly amendment that we approve, or that Jack moves $225,000 towards the expense of this proposal? Seeing no objection, that is now the motion on the table. Any further discussion? Michael?
I'll be voting no as premature. It's not a vote against the project, but
Okay.
I can't decide if I don't know the rest of the picture.
Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No?
Motion passes 5-1 with Terry Borneman absent. Thank you, Rick. You can't crack jokes with your mic off, Gene. That's not fair for the people at home. Okay, next up we had a TBD work plan.
Yes, and so I have a quick question about schedule. Is our 1 p.m. council start time a hard start time? Are we running out of time, or Marie? Because
Well, Let's say we can go a little extra longer if we
Okay.
have to.
okay. So with the non-motorized portion, you received a memo from staff outlining our recommendation for the non-motorized projects. It is consistent with what you saw during the 6-year TIP presentation. What we're trying to do is leverage the non-motorized TBD money with other capital projects. So you see that a large portion of the projects are related or in or around the Alabama Corridor project, which is scheduled for construction in 2015. We have a series of projects that come from the Bicycle Master Plan and the Pedestrian Master Plan, and we can certainly go through those today, depending on how much time we want to spend on it, and I apologize, we're running a little bit tight on time. We have one other project that was not directly out of the Bicycle Master Plan or Pedestrian Master Plan, but it is a project that has been around for a while, and that's what we're calling the Birchwood Sidewalk Project near Morey's off of Northwest. It's a project that used to be on the 6-year TIP. Council has seen it before earlier this year, and we're recommending moving forward with that using TBD money to fund construction of that sidewalk. In addition, and I failed to mention that this has gone to the Transportation Commission, there is a resolution in your packet adopting these projects as recommended for the 2015-16 budget. They also recommended, they did approve the Birchwood Avenue project, although they had some concerns that it was not a project that had gone through the normal process, meaning that it came out of the PED plan as a high-ranked project. It was actually a Tier 3 sidewalk project, but given the discussions we've had in the past about that area and the need to improve pedestrian traffic through Birchwood, and also the stairwell down from Birchwood down to the Squalcombe Creek Trail, which is a parks project that is also in the parks budget, was why we were recommending it. The Transportation Commission also approved setting aside a small portion of money, about $40,000 a year, to look at what was identified, or what were identified as further study needed projects in the Bicycle Master Plan. Those were projects that were more complex in nature, dealing with issues along corridors like Lakeway, where we know we need to have some type of bicycle improvement, but it was not immediately clear to us what that might be. As we went through the planning process, This would allow us to take some money to do that initial planning and engineering to come up with a proper scoped project. So the TC supported that as well. And the Transportation Commission also recommended in their resolution that we look at a project that was not on the plan or was not on our recommendations, but was in the pedestrian master plan, and that was looking at the Barclay Boulevard intersection with Sussex and Brandywine. The TBD board received a letter from some residents in that area concerned about that crossing. It's in the proximity of some trails, and the TC suggested or recommended that we move forward and do some analysis looking at what that might be needed there, what solution might be needed there to improve that. If you would like, Chris is here. We can go through the projects one by one. We can answer questions that you may have. Michael submitted some questions that we'd be happy to answer that had to do with the proposed project list for 15 or 16. And Kathy, maybe based on time, I'd be happy to respond in either of those manners.
First of all, what is the question? Why is the Birchwood project called out? I'm confused.
Birchwood project was called out because it was a project that staff had brought forward to council based on meetings with the Birchwood neighborhood, identifying infrastructure type improvements that could potentially help that area. And it didn't come through as a high-ranked pedestrian project in the pedestrian master plan. So the Transportation Commission had questions as to why staff was recommending a Tier 3 sidewalk project when there were still 1 and 2 tier projects that weren't being done. We felt it was appropriate because it was a project that used to be on the 6-year tip. We had actually started design, kind of ran into a situation with right-of-way and put the project on hold. That's why it was called out specifically. Just concerns about process, making sure that we've adopted these new mode-specific plans, that we try to stay with those plans as much as possible, but staff felt it was appropriate to recommend this year.
Okay, thank you. What kind of in-depth discussion are we hoping to have right now with supposedly 6 minutes left? Curious, Michael?
I had some questions on the memo. Some of them are small, but a lot of them center around just one real question, which has to do with why some lower tier projects are funded and some high tier ones aren't.
Okay.
But let me make your job a little bit easier, Ted. I take the tier structure as not a iron requirement on us. It was a result of a human decision-making process, and there's reasons why the tierage may not be exactly right, and there's also reasons why you would want to bump a project out of sequence, like a lot of the ones over in the whole area, south of Alabama, are bumped up because they can be brought forward as a suite of projects. But so we can maybe just deal with it as kind of one issue. Why are they not always in sequence with the tiers or the short-term, long-term?
Right. And I would be happy to answer that. I do want to ask a quick question of Kathy.
Sure.
Given, I don't want to short-term this discussion, and I apologize that this was only a half hour. I was thinking it was an hour. Would it be more appropriate to maybe skip to the budget?
Well,
Because we
that's
have
what
to
I was
have the
thinking.
budget approved
Yeah.
by the end of the year.
Yeah.
Have Brian quickly go over the budget, ask the board to approve the budget, and we will come back to the TBD board because we can come back to you. And in the near future, we don't want to go too far because we have to move on these projects, but we could come back either prior to the end of the year or right after the end of the year and get these approved.
We could probably do a half an hour on just this work plan,
Yeah.
frankly. Okay, I'm going to recommend we do that, if that's okay with other folks, seeing head nods. Okay, so let's skip to the budget and plan to bring the work plan back as soon as possible.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I included just the budget out of the preliminary budget for the TBD. It is very straightforward. It's one-third, one-third, one-third. The WTA contract is in here at $1,450,000. They have given us a credit based on actual utilization at the end of each year too. So that's some of the money that we've identified that would be available for the Bellis Fair, depending on where we end 2014, but also going into 2015. One-third is really $1,580,000. So there is a little bit over $100,000, and we can easily come up with that $225,000 for half of the project. I have continued the allocation of 1/3 to all three legs of the stool through the 2015-2016 budget. We are at 29 to 33%, so we're right in the range. After the end of the year, we'll have a total actual amounts as the work in progress makes it through. Through September, we've only done 1/3 of the budget, $2.1 million. So there's a whole bunch of work that has been done that's not reflected in the actual numbers yet that we will do and bring back to council at the end of the year as part of the end financial review. But right now, I just propose that we move forward with the budget as it is. It's 1/3 allocation. Michael.
Yeah, Michael?
Move approval of the budget as proposed on page 51 of the City of Bellingham's preliminary budget.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion in 5
Couple
seconds. Yeah. Is there any further discussion? Being none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, budget passes 6-0 with Terry Borneman absent. Okay, anything else for the good of the order while we have 1 minute left?
I just think before the end of the year, we could have another half hour and go through the projects. That should work.
Yep,
I'll work with Marie to schedule something.
okay. Michael?
As I said, in June, we requested a discussion at the highest level about the resurfacing.
Yeah.
You've been busy. Do you know when we might be able to schedule that?
Yeah, we worked on something. We started to do it and then started to look at the change in the city budget as it relates to the street fund.
Right.
And got sidetracked a little bit in that discussion. It became a little bit larger and ended up delaying it a little bit. We can certainly come back after the budget's adopted and we have time to schedule a work session focused just on resurfacing really what our current budget means related to what the needs are. And I think that's what you're asking
First
for.
quarter at least?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Okay. If there's nothing else, we'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting.